Welcome to Sales and Marketing Talk Show. Today we are discussing positioning, and I have April Dunford joining me here today. And positioning actually has been one topic that a lot of my listeners has been asking for. And I think the main reason for that one is that positioning is super important for companies, but still not that many companies like understand the value of positioning and why they should be doing that and how they should be doing that one. So great to have you on the show, April. Welcome.
Yeah, well, it's good to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
When I was preparing for this talk show, I went to your website. I basically do that one with all of my guests, and there was greatly about like what positioning is, and I could actually read that one as a like starting point for this discussion. It said on your website that positioning defines how our product is different and better than alternatives for a particular set of customers. Strong
Yeah.
positioning is the foundation of great marketing and sales, and it's the starting point for a company's messaging, branding, lead generation, and sales strategy. And as I mentioned, there are, I think, a lot of companies who haven't still worked enough on their positioning. And I would like to ask you, like, when was the first time that you realized the importance of positioning? You started to talk about that and I really saw the value over there.
Yeah. So it's a good question. The first time, my background is interesting in that I don't actually have a degree in marketing. I came out of engineering school, but my first job out of school was in the marketing department as a product marketer. And I was assigned to a product that was failing. So we had launched it into market. It had been in the market for 4 or 5 months. We hadn't sold very many of them. And the first job I was given was I was supposed to call all of the customers that we currently had for that product to see how angry they would be if we end of lifed the product and shut it off. And so I made all these calls. And what I discovered in those calls was the vast majority of the customers weren't using the product at all. They weren't going to be mad. Like 92 out of 100 customers I talked to didn't care. But there were 8 that cared a lot. But those 8 were doing something completely different with the product than we had originally envisioned. And so as a result of that, I took that back to my executive team. We ended up doing a repositioning of this product. So we had originally positioned it as desktop productivity software. We repositioned it as an embeddable database for mobile devices. And then the product took off. And it ended up being a wild success. We got acquired by a big company in Silicon Valley. My boss quit. I ended up being in charge of marketing for this entire department. We now had 5 or 6 products that we were working on, and we slowly worked through repositioning all of them. So at that point, I thought, wow, like this positioning thing is pretty important. If we get it wrong, it can kill a product. If we get it right, it can turn a product that looks like a dud into something really successful. So at that point, I decided, well, I better figure out how to do this properly because it seems like a really important thing that me as a vice president of marketing would need to know how to do.
Yeah, and that's a great story. I think it might be like surprising for many SaaS companies out there that if they would go and ask their like clients that would you be disappointed if we would kind of delete our product? And I think there was be a lot of surprising answers for founders and the teams.
Yeah, well, you hope that 92% of them don't say, "Yeah, shut it off. It's okay." But it's a good example of how sometimes the data lies to us. Like if I had just gone and done a survey and not actually talked to those customers, I would have looked at the survey and said, wow, like 92% of people don't care if this product exists or not. Let's kill it. But what the real thing I would have missed was that 8% of those customers were wildly happy with the product, but they were doing something with it that was completely different. It was not the way we had marketed the product at all. And we would have missed that critical bit of customer insight had we just looked at the data and not actually dug under what exactly is going on here between people that love it and people that don't. But that was the clue that we needed, that we could actually take this exact same product, position it in a different market for a different use case with a really different set of customers. And that thing that looked like, was a failure ended up making hundreds of millions of revenue. And, we could have easily turned it off had we not figured that out.
Yeah. But what do you think, like, what is the current status of like positioning in the market? Like, of course, I think people that you are working with, those are companies that most likely like understand the value of positioning, since they are paying you to help them work on that. But what do you think, like in big picture, if we are looking at the like SaaS companies, tech companies out there, do people realize the value of great positioning?
Well, here's the thing. Positioning is one of those things that we don't tend to think a lot about it unless it's really broken. So most of the companies that I work with, and even some of the ones that I don't, that we're just talking about it casually, the product gets conceived with a position in mind. So what I would call a positioning thesis, like, the founder woke up in the morning and said, what sucks? CRM sucks. I'm going to make better CRM. And then they build it and they launch it. And maybe the positioning that they launch with works and maybe it doesn't. So often what we have is this kind of default positioning. We never actually sat down and worked through any kind of process to validate that the positioning was good or bad. It was just kind of baked into the idea of what the product was all about at its conception. But then what happens is, the product changes, you add things, you remove things. People tell you, we love this, we don't like this. So your product's changing over time. At the same time, your competitors are changing. The market landscape is changing. The buyers themselves, their priorities are shifting. And you fast forward a few years, and the thing that you thought was CRM, well, maybe it makes more sense now to contextualize it as something else. And so, maybe it's more collaboration software, maybe it's more operations software. And so at the point where your positioning starts to not work and you get this confusion, you walk into a customer meeting and you say, hey, I've got this great CRM. And everyone's like, wait, but no, that doesn't actually seem like CRM. I don't know what that is. At that point, when it's not working anymore, these companies that have just sort of fallen into a position, they don't know what to do to try and shift it because they never did positioning to start with. So I think that's very typical. I think most folks fall into kind of a default positioning. If it works, great, they run with it. If it doesn't work, they don't know how to fix it. Or even if it works for a while and then eventually it doesn't work anymore, then they're like, okay, I get that I might have a problem here. I just have no idea how to actually fix it and make it good because we never really did anything according to a methodology when we cooked it up in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And I really think that, like, if we think about positioning, I think it might be like hard to even understand like when the positioning it is the problem. For example, we are working with SaaS companies as well, and kind of the problem might be that they are thinking that, hey, our problem is that our free trial users are not turning into paid customers. And that can be a positioning problem, or it can be something totally different as well. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like I found that most of the companies that I'm working with, like the first thing to look at is, do you have happy customers? Right? Are there customers using their stuff and they're happy? And if you've got a reasonable number of happy customers, well, then, you're doing something right on the product side. You got a product, people like it. But what you'll see with weak positioning is, you'll have a hard time having people understand what the thing is all about. Like the most common symptom of weak positioning I see is in a first sales meeting. If you sit in on those meetings, you'll see your sales rep is doing a great job pitching the product. Oh, here's what it is and here's what we do. And they'll get about halfway through the pitch and the customer will be like, wait, pitch it to me again. Like go back to the beginning. I'm not sure we get it. Or they'll say, oh yeah, I get what you are. You're just like Salesforce, except you're not like Salesforce. You're nothing like Salesforce. So the customers are confused. And you'll see this thing that, at some point in the pitch, or maybe it's not the first time you pitch them, it's the second time or the third time, this light bulb goes on. And then the customer says, oh, now I get it. It's this. And it's that gap between what a happy customer understands about your product And what a new customer sees when they first come in, that gap, there's something missing in your positioning that's getting these new prospects confused, whereas an existing prospect gets it, they love it.
Yeah, I think that's great example. But maybe on a follow up on that one, I think that's easy way if you have the salespeople, if you are talking with the clients. But I know that there is a lot of people listening out there that maybe even don't have any sales team, but they are like super marketing led, product led organization, people going to their site and buying the product directly from there. So how do you identify on that way if your like positioning is messed up?
Yeah. So, so there's a few ways to do it. Like you should be talking to customers somewhere in your organization. If you're never talking to a customer, I think you're in big trouble. Like, and you got bigger problems than positioning is my guess. But let's say we've got a product and it's been in market a long time, and we've got, or not a long time, but we've got a reasonable amount of traction in the market. One of the things you can do is, so first of all, you're probably taking some sort of measurement of happiness of customers. Like maybe it's a net promoter score or something else, but you're probably regularly doing a measurement of that. So if you were to take just the really happy customers, and let's say these happy customers are a good fit for your product, if you get them on the phone and you interview them, then what you're looking for is, what are the component pieces of positioning that I need to worry about here? So the first one is, what are those customers actually comparing us to? So positioning is usually about highlighting the differentiation of your offering versus all the other ways that they could solve the problem. Well, you don't know what you need to position against until you really understand what your customers are comparing you to. So you get these folks on the phone and you're like, hey, so take me back to before you bought our product. What were you doing? So what was status quo? Were you using a spreadsheet? Maybe you were doing it by hand. Maybe you were using a different product. And then what happened that made you wake up one morning and decide you had to do something else? And then when you did, what did you do? Did you go out looking for solutions? Did you make a short list? And who was on that short list besides us? Now, if I can answer all those questions, then I know here's what I have to beat in order to win a deal. I have to beat status quo, and I also have to beat anything else that the customer may end up looking at that's in direct competition to me. Both of those things count. Once I have that stake in the ground, then I can say, well, this is what I've got to beat in order to win a deal. What have I got that they don't have? Right? Capabilities wise, what can my software do that the alternatives can't do? And then I can take those capabilities, map that to value, and say, like, so what? I have this capability. So what? Why does a customer care? Why is that important for their business? And ideally, what I end up with there is a couple of value themes. That's going to be the center of my differentiated value propositions. Once I have that, then I can say, well, this is the differentiated value my product can deliver for customers that the other folks can't. I could go sell this to anybody, but not everybody cares about this value in the same way. So what are the characteristics of a target customer that makes them care way more than a regular person about this stuff? That's kind of my definition of a best fit customer. And now I can lean back and say, all right, I've got this differentiated value. I'm trying to communicate it to these types of buyers. What is the best context to position my product in so that this value kind of makes sense to these folks? So it's the answer to the question, like, what am I? What is the market I intend to win? Am I email or am I chat? Am I team collaboration or am I something else? And that's how I can figure out what my best market category is to position in. So that's sort of how I do it.
Yeah. How about if there's someone listening and they are like, we don't have those happy customers yet, and there are like a lot of new SaaS companies coming out there, and they might be thinking like, what should be the like unique value for my product? Like how would you approach that one if you don't have any like customers yet?
Yeah. So you built the product, I'm assuming, based on what I would call a positioning thesis. So, you didn't just make anything. You woke up in the morning and said, you know what sucks? Email sucks. I'm going to make better email. And so you had in your mind when the product got created, this is who my competition is. This is how I'm different. This is the value I can deliver to customers that better than anybody else. These are the kind of customers that are probably going to like this thing. Therefore, this is the market I'm going to dominate. And it's a thesis, right? So you have a positioning thesis. Most folks don't write it down. It's a good idea to do that, but you have a positioning thesis. So when you go to launch the product, now we're going to see whether your thesis is right or not. So here's my advice on that. Typically what we do is we'd position exactly like the thesis. But my experience is that often the thesis isn't entirely correct. Parts of it are, but a lot of it isn't. And we get it out, we get the product out in the market, and it turns out, customers didn't behave exactly the way I predicted they would. Things that I thought would be differentiating aren't. I'm getting compared to alternatives I didn't expect. Customers that I didn't even think about love my stuff or don't love my stuff. And so I think actually the best way to launch a brand new product is to be conscious of the thesis that's baked into the product, but keep the positioning a little bit loose, because until I get my first wave of customers through the door, I don't really know if my thesis is correct or not. And so I should kind of run on the assumption that it's probably going to change a little bit based on what I learned from this first bunch of customers. So this is my bad analogy, but it's the only one I've got. I'll give it to you. So it's like you designed a fishing net, and your thesis was, this thing is awesome for tuna. This is a tuna fishing net. It's amazing. It's got special tuna fishing catching features. And I could launch that and say very specifically, it's a tuna fishing net, my people, and no one should look at this except tuna fishermen. And the tuna fishermen will come and they'll buy it. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Or I could say, you know what, my thesis is it's a tuna fishing net, but I'm not so sure about that yet because I haven't got any tuna fishermen using this thing yet. So you know what? I'm going to keep the positioning kind of loose, and I'm going to say, I got a net. It's a net for fish, all kinds of fish, big fish, probably big fish. Yeah, it's a big fish net. That's what it is. And just let a whole bunch of fishermen have a go with it and let them use it. Let's see what they pull up. Maybe what you get is like, ooh, it's grouper. Who knew? I wasn't even thinking about the grouper. Turns out my thing's fantastic grouper fishing net. Once I've got my first wave of customers through, I can say, wow, it's actually way easier to sell to the grouper fishermen. There's way more of them. They love my stuff. And then I can tighten up the positioning around that. So it feels terrible when you're in this phase and your positioning's kind of loose and you're just like, yeah, big fishing net. It's hard to pitch that. But until you get your first wave of customers in, I think you don't actually want to tighten it up too much because you don't want to exclude too many people. And you don't know if your thesis is correct yet. So work on getting the first wave through and then tighten the positioning up after that.
Yeah. What do you think? Like, I understand that example, and I would say that if I would do a SaaS tool for some kind of new category that there isn't super much competition, then I would for sure go with that way. I think it's a no-brainer. But if I would, for example, let's say that I'm building a CRM system, like super saturated market, a lot of competition.
Are you kidding? There's so much opportunity in CRM. I disagree with you fundamentally on that. There's a giant market. That's the thing about crowded market categories, usually mean that the market itself is gigantic. Yeah. And so you probably build your product with a thesis that says, all right, this is CRM just for lawyers or something like that. Exactly. Right? So it is CRM just for lawyers. And that actually might be loose enough because you're not saying big law offices, small law offices with more than a couple of partners. Like, I don't know, any kind of lawyer. Like, that's actually a big segment. And so if you came out and said CRM for lawyers, that's probably good enough. But I bet you, if I come back to you 6 months later, you'd say, oh yeah, we're CRM for big law offices or tiny independent law offices or something, because there's a lot of diversity in there. And I bet your product isn't perfect for all of them. Yeah. So you want to be able to, again, keep it loose, but I think that's fairly loose. If you went in and said it was CRM for lawyers, or you'd say, it's CRM for independent consultants. That's
Yeah.
still really loose. Like there's all kinds of independent consultants, or you're like CRM for small businesses. Like I would say that's
Yeah.
too loose. You might need to get more specific than that. But but I wouldn't go so specific that you're like, this is CRM for dry cleaners in Ontario. I might not go that specific because you're putting a lot of eggs in one basket there. And if it doesn't work for the dry cleaners of Ontario, now what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. I agree on there, and I think like if we think about like loose or tight, I think that means different things on different person, because for someone like CRM for law firms is like, whoa, that's super tight, and then you are like, it's super loose. So I I
That's
think
actually
that
that's
makes sense.
actually big. I think that's
Yeah.
big. But it's only because CRM in itself is such a giant opportunity. Like the market for CRM is so big, that I think you can slice that market 100 ways, and then the slices are each really big.
Yeah, exactly. You are talking in your book about like 3 different styles of positioning. Could you
Yeah.
open up a bit, like what do you mean by this?
Yeah. So at a big picture level, we have 3 styles of positioning. I can either position my product in an existing market category. And if I position in an existing category, I have 2 choices. So I can either position directly against the leader in the market category and position in a way like I want to dominate the entire category. Or I can split that existing market category up and say, I don't want to dominate all of CRM. I just want to dominate the piece for lawyers. And so it's either, I want to go head to head with the category leader, or I'm going to do this kind of big fish, small pond thing. And I'm going to do a niche play inside a big existing market. The third option is I've got something brand new in a space that's kind of emerging, and the category doesn't exist. And none of the existing categories really work. If I try to position my product in there, I'm actually underselling what we do. So I'm going to create a whole new market category. I'm going to convince the market that category should exist. And then I'm going to position myself as the leader in this brand new thing. So there's kind of 3 ways to do it. If we think about positioning an existing market category, it's a lot easier than creating a new market category, because, if I say we're a CRM, you already know what a CRM is. I don't have to spend 2 hours explaining what a CRM is or why you care. Positioning in an existing market category and going after the established market leader, on the other hand, that's very difficult. So if I were to just say I'm a CRM, no qualifiers, like what I've got is a CRM, that's a bit like declaring war on Mark Benioff. Like, that's it, we're taking on Salesforce, they're dead meat, we're going to beat them. Like, and what are the chances that you, a little 10-person startup, are actually going to accomplish that? Very slim. I think and so you'll see very few companies, even big companies, attempt to enter a market space and take on the market leader head to head. Unless you're number 2 already, that usually isn't a good strategy. You don't want to do that. So instead, what we see much more frequently in startups is, at least when they start, is they'll come out and say, well, we're not CRM for everybody. We're just CRM for restaurants, or we're CRM for, the people that use these types of software, or people that have this kind of a problem. And so we'll be that CRM for recurring revenue businesses, or CRM for whatever. So we'll qualify it, and then we'll position ourselves as the leader in that. And so most of the software we know and love today, in the early stages of their existence, they were positioned that way. Like Salesforce is a really good example. When they launched, they were CRM for very small businesses. That's what they were. There was an established market leader, an enterprise CRM, that wasn't touching small businesses at all. And Salesforce entered the market, and the reason they could do it and satisfy the small businesses is they were the only ones that had CRM in the cloud. So it was no software. You didn't have to have an IT department. And that was the first time that companies without an IT department actually had the opportunity to use CRM. So that was it. They were CRM for small businesses, and that's how they did it. And then eventually that positioning changed and expanded. So we see a lot of this niche play in startups. The last one is this idea that, I'm going to create a new market category and then position myself in it. So we see this a lot when it's like emerging. So the example I used to use was smart glasses. So, we kind of know what smart glasses are conceptually. Like if I say I sell smart glasses, you've got an idea, maybe there's augmented reality, maybe there's a camera on it, maybe there's speakers in the arms. Like I kind of, I got a vague idea what it is. But if I were to ask you like, well, who's the leader in that category? You'd be like, I have no idea. Actually, who leads in smart glasses? I don't know. Snap, maybe. Yeah. I don't know. So you might want to define that category and then position yourself as a leader in it. Now, most of the time, like in that example, I'm talking about smart glasses. Well, that's already been defined, sort of. You kind of get what it is, but there is no clear leader there. But here's what happens. The minute the market gets to the point where everybody says, yeah, I kind of get what that is, then what you get is the situation we have in smart glasses right now, where thousands and thousands of competitors pile into it. Because now it's ripe, right? I don't have to explain to you what smart glasses are. You already get it. Yeah. True category creation happened before that, when Google tried to get into it and said, hey, these are smart glasses. And we're like, what the heck are smart glasses? And they're walking around looking like geeks, and everyone like, that's a bad idea. We don't like that. Yeah. And so it's a bit like walking in, instead of saying we're CRM, you walk in and you say, I've got this thing. We're flu flummer. And you're like, what's a flu flummer? And you're like, oh, I'm so glad you asked. And now I explain what a flu flummer is, and then I try to position myself in it. And so this is a very long game. It takes a long time to establish a market category in the minds of customers. And so you need patient, deep-pocketed investors that are willing to come with you on that journey while you establish that market category. And then the minute the category emerges, you need to have enough guts and stamina to fight off all the fast follower competitors that come at you the minute the category is established. And so that's why the history of Silicon Valley teaches us that generally category creators do not survive to lead the category they created. This is why we don't use Ask Jeeves. We use Google. This is why no one uses MySpace. We use Facebook. Nobody knows what a creative MP3 player is. Like generally, it's very hard to, suffer through 10 years of category creation. And then by the moment the category starts to emerge, you've got all these new competitors, and they're fresh, and their investors are brand new. And, it's hard to fight it off. It's trendy right now, particularly in Silicon Valley, to talk about how, everybody should be creating a category, blah, blah, blah. I actually think that's not true. And I think it's one of the riskiest ways to position your product. Sometimes you have to do it, but generally you only do it when there's no other way to position the product. Like literally any other existing category wouldn't work for you.
Yeah, and I actually think that like creating a category could be like one total episode here in this talk show. Totally. And I must ask you, like, if you were in my shoes, who would you invite to talk about that topic? Like either a person or like company you think have done a great job there lately?
Well, I just sat on a panel with Mary Pergolino, who's the CMO at Active Campaign. And she's done several companies now where they've been, involved in category creation and done stuff around category creation. So she's really smart about this stuff, and I think has a very practical approach to it, and and I think is smart on this. And there's a lot of people out there that claim to be creating categories, but I wouldn't actually say that they are new categories. They're essentially existing categories with a bit of a qualifier on it, and so they're calling that category creation. In my book, I talk about, I had an interview with Mark Organ, who was the original founder of Eloqua, and essentially created the category of marketing automation. And so I think he's a smart thinker about that, and his story about how he did that in Eloqua is quite a good one. So that's a person I might talk to as well.
Yeah, great tips. Thank you for those. But hey, then like one thing that I think typically people listening to this podcast are thinking of is like where to start with. I think one thing that came to mind that you mentioned is like always talk to your best fit clients. But like after you have done that one, like where would you start? Like if you are like now, okay, here we are, this is where we want to go, but like how to
Yeah.
take like positioning into action.
Yeah. So there's a handful of things I would recommend. So one is you don't want to actually just do positioning like it's a marketing exercise and the marketing department is going to do that and then roll it out to everybody else. I think that's a recipe for lousy positioning. Positioning is kind of a team sport. So if I'm going to work on positioning, I need to get marketing, sales, product, customer success, the executive team all together in a room, and we should be working on it together, because I'm not going to get that positioning to stick if I don't have agreement and alignment across the executive team on here's what we compete with, here's how we're different, this is the value, here's who we're going after, this is the market we're going to win. We all need to be in agreement on that. We all need to be able to tell the story in order for us to execute on that positioning in a consistent way. So I think everybody needs to work on that. Once we do have the positioning done, I think the best way to test positioning is to take that positioning and turn it into a sales pitch. And I think that's the thing that marketing and sales should work on together. Build the story or the narrative around how do we actually present this to a customer, and then let's go take it out and test it on some qualified prospects and see how it works. So I would recommend we do that first before we start worrying about messaging, because you'll learn a lot in those conversations. You'll end up tuning things a little bit. It's very hard to tune messaging once you've got that. I think it's way easier to get face-to-face with customers, get their feedback on it, do some fast iterations on it, tune it up, and then we worry about messaging after that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And lastly, I always have the same thing in the end. So I have a question from my previous guest to you, and then you have the chance to ask a question to my next guest. And actually, on a previous episode, we were discussing sales, and I had a Sian joining me there. And actually, you mentioned earlier that Salesforce started to sell to like smaller and medium-sized companies, and then they went to selling to more enterprise companies. And actually, Sian's question was related to that one. And the question was that like when companies are pushing from small and mid-sized companies to enterprise, how should they be changing their positioning in that kind of change? Like if the product keeps itself like kind of same.
Yeah. Well, generally, the product is not the same. Like if it was the same product, you probably would have been selling enterprise already. So generally, the product is not the same. But at the same time, what you've got is the product is evolving, right? The product is evolving. And then, as well, your go-to-market motion is evolving too, because how you sell to small, medium businesses is not generally the same sales motion as how you sell to enterprise. Same deal with marketing, right? Like the marketing channels and what you're doing in marketing is really different. The positioning, it's very natural for positioning to evolve over time. And so it's an important thing to understand about positioning. We don't just set it once and forget it. And, that it's good forever. We've carved it into the rock and we never change it. The positioning should be changing as the product evolves. As your product matures, you'll have different competitors. So between SMB and enterprise, for example, the competitive comparables are probably very different. Therefore, what's differentiating about your product is different. It's a different set of features that are differentiating, and the value that those features can deliver is different for bigger companies than it is for smaller companies. So you're going to have to orient that stuff completely differently as you move into different markets. You can see it, if we want to use Salesforce as an example, at one point they were the world's best CRM for small, medium businesses, and their value proposition was all around ease of use, ease of administration. Like it was really easy to get it stood up. It was really easy to get started. It was really easy for the sales reps to use it. I don't think any of those things are true about Salesforce today. I don't think it's easy to get stood up. I don't think it's easy to use. But instead, their value proposition is more around it does everything. It integrates with all the other things you want to use. They have way better analytics and tracking in there, things that bigger enterprises care about that the small people didn't so much. And, and frankly, at the SMB level, you're seeing a lot of competition down there because I don't think Salesforce is a very good fit down there anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Agree on that one. And I think it was great reminder that positioning shouldn't be the same like all the way. What do you think? Is there like some kind of rule of thumb there that, hey, I should get back to my positioning like every 6 months or every 12 months, or like how should you be identifying that, hey, now is probably a good time to be changing that one?
I usually back when I was a VP marketing, we had a positioning check-in every 6 months. So we do positioning, we let it go 2 quarters and we would check in. Most of the time we didn't have to change it, but we'd get the group back together again and we'd look, has the competition changed? Has our differentiated changed? And if the answer was no, fine, we'll just run with the positioning for another 6 months and we'll check in then. Sometimes you'll check in, you'll be like, sales will be like, hey, we're starting to see these other competitors in here. And you notice our 3 competitors had a new release. And now this thing that used to be differentiating, now we all have it. So it's not really differentiating anymore. So we'll update the positioning because of that. So I do it every 6 months. The only exception to that would be if something big happened in the market. So let's say a big competitor did an acquisition or a new competitor moved in the space that wasn't there before, or something big outside thing happens like a global pandemic hits, then I think that's a good time for you to take a step back and have another look at your positioning and call the emergency positioning meeting. Let's get everybody together and have a look at it and see how do these new events impact what we're doing on the positioning side.
Yeah, great. And then lastly, on the next episode, I'm talking with Michael Hansen, and we are talking about sales outreach.
Oh, that's a great topic. I love it.
And
I'm going to join for that. Sales outreach is really hard. I love it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes down to positioning as well, like how you should be positioning yourself there. But what do you think? What would be a hard question to ask from Michael?
Yeah, I like this topic a lot. So I'd be asking, like, how do you make sure that when you're doing the outreach, you're bringing in the right customers, meaning the customers that are actually going to be a good fit for your stuff, as opposed to just customers that are easy to trick into having a sales meeting. So I don't want just anybody. I want the right people. So how do you work that out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I will be asking that.
So I guess the question is, how do you ensure that your target in the sales outreach is a good fit customer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that one. But hey, big thanks for joining me, April, and big thanks for all the listeners. And if you like the episode, feel free to share that one and start working on your positioning. And have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thanks.